Hello, my name is Jody Ramos, and my presentation today focuses on Ivan Pavlov, the Russian psychologist whose work changed how we understand learning and behavior. In this presentation, we'll look at the major milestones in his life, the world events that shaped his scientific outlook, and how those experiences influence his theory of classical conditioning. By the end of this presentation, we'll see how Pavlov's ideas not only transformed psychology, but also reflected the historical and cultural context of this time. Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849 in Ryazan, Russia, to a religious Orthodox family. His strict upbringing instilled a sense of discipline and order that carried into his later scientific work. He had originally planned to become a priest, but Pavlov shifted paths after discovering Darwin's ideas on evolution and scientific inquiry. He decided to enter the University of St. Petersburg, where he studied physiology and became interested in how the body and brain were connected. This early period aligned with the rise of positivist science. This belief that all knowledge should be grounded in observable facts, and this mindset became the foundation of Pavlov's latest emphasis on measurable behavior. After university, Pavlov's research on digestion led to one of psychology's most famous discoveries, classical conditioning. While studying dogs' salivary glands, he noticed that animals began salivating before receiving food, responding instead to cues like footsteps or the sound of a bell. He called these psychic secretions, which he later explained through learned associations between stimuli and responses. In 1904, Pavlov was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology for his work on digestion, officially marking him as one of the leading scientists of his era. Pavlov's discoveries allowed a shift in the influence of future behavioral psychologists and established classical conditioning as a fundamental concept in the study of learning and behavior. No major global events had directly shaped Ivan Pavlov's initial discovery of classical conditioning, as this was an accidental finding during his physiological research on canine digestion. However, we can consider the world he lived in during the period in which led up to his discovery and later implications of his classical conditioning finding. The first world event that we have is the emancipation of Russia serfs in 1861, and this began to reshape Russian society, emphasizing progress and education. Brett McCabe from Johns Hopkins Magazine writes, Russia, and especially its younger generation, were swept up in a reform-minded, modernizing bloom during this period. The second world event that we have is the Industrial Revolution that introduced mechanical and empirical ways of thinking that inspired Pavlov's systematic approach. Daniel Todds, who wrote an 880-page biography called Ivan Pavlov, A Russian Life in Science, spent 20 years researching Pavlov's life through archives, letters, and lab notebooks, uncovering the portrait of Western and Soviet portrayals of Pavlov. The Soviets had painted Pavlov as a model communist scientist, while the Americans, especially like behaviorists like John Watson, had claimed he was a mechanical conditioner. However, Todd showed that both nations' perspectives about this theorist was incorrect. Pavlov was not only interested in simple behavior. Instead, he had sought to use conditioned reflexes to explore consciousness and subjective experiences. The third world event that we have is the Russo-Japanese War. During this period, Russia was in turmoil politically, socially, and economically. Many scientific institutions, including Pavlov's laboratory, suffered funding cuts as resources were redirected to support the war effort. Pavlov was forced to pause parts of his psychological research, yet this instability actually shaped his ideas about adaptation and survival. In short, even though the war limited his resources, it strengthened his curiosity about how living beings learn and adapt, setting the stage for his later work on classical conditioning. The fourth world event that we have is World War I. This global conflict brought even greater disruption to Pavlov's work. His research assistants were drafted, supplies were scarce, and many of his experiments had to be postponed. Instead of giving up, Pavlov used this period to explore new questions, specifically how both animals and people respond to stress and uncertainty. His perseverance through the war and political instability reflected the very principles he studied: learning, adjustment, and resilience in the face of environmental change. The fifth world event that we have is the Russian Revolution of 1917 that transformed the political landscape and made science a tool for national progress. Pavlov's relationships with the communists and the Soviet government were unique, not only for the Soviet Union, but for also the history of science. Pavlov was never a politician, but he spoke for what he considered was the truth. In 1922, during the conditions in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution of 1917, he had requested permission from Vladimir Lenin to transfer his laboratory abroad. Lenin denied his request, saying that Russia needed scientists such as Pavlov. After returning from his first visit to the United States in 1923, he publicly denounced communism, stating that the basis for international Marxism was false. The final world event that we have is the rise of the Soviet Union, which promoted Pavlov as an example of materialist objective science. Though he was an outspoken critic of the communist regime, the government protected and funded his work because of his prestige and his scientific theories, which they used for their own ideological purposes. Ivan Pavlov's most influential contribution to psychology is his theory of classical conditioning. This emerged from his research on digestive systems of dogs in the late 19th and 20th centuries. He had originally studied salivation in response to food, but Pavlov noticed that dogs began salivating not only when food was presented, but also when they heard the footsteps or the bell associated with feeding. He interpreted this as a learned association, a connection formed between a neutral stimulus, like the bell, and an unconditioned stimulus, the food, resulting in a conditioned response, which was the salivation. This became the foundation of classical conditioning, demonstrating that behavior could be learned through association. His findings laid the groundwork for behaviorism, and this became a dominant school of thought in the early 20th century that emphasized observable behavior over internal mental states. Beyond the laboratory, classical conditioning explains many everyday learning experiences. For instance, people may develop phobias, preferences, or even emotional reactions through associative learning. In therapy, classical conditioning has informed the development of systematic desensitization and exposure therapy. These both were used to help individuals unlearn anxiety or fear responses. These applications show how Pavlov's discoveries bridge physiology, psychology, and real-world behavior modification. As we near the conclusion of this presentation, Pavlov's legacy extends far beyond his original experiments with dogs. His discovery of classical conditioning fundamentally changed how scientists understand learning, behavior, and adaptation, not just in animals, but in humans as well. His ideas directly inspired behaviorism, influencing psychologists like John Watson and B.F. Skinner, who built upon his conditioning principles to study human emotion, motivation, and learning. The emphasis on observation and experiment became a defining characteristic of psychology. In contemporary contexts, Pavlov's theories continue to inform a range of fields, from education and advertising to clinical therapy and neuroscience. Pavlov's legacy is not just about conditioning dogs, it's about demonstrating that learning is a predictable, observable process shaped by experience, environment, and association. His work established the foundation for psychology as an empirical science and continues to shape our understanding of behavior in both human and animal contexts. If you are interested in further reading on the topic discussed, here is my works cited page for more research. Thank you for your time and attention.